What's up everybody, Dan here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the GT Omega Prime Lite cockpit. This is GT Omega's entry-level introduction into aluminum profile rigs. In their lineup, it sits just above their Titan tubular rig and just below their more robust and more premium Prime cockpit. The Prime Lite is designed to get you into a profile-style cockpit for less money than it typically costs for one of the more premium options. Now, before we get any further, I need to give you the disclaimer that GT Omega did send me this rig out for free to review, but as always, they've had no input on anything you see or hear in this video. All views and opinions here are my own. They did not pay me any money for this review, and they will not see it before you guys do. The next thing that I think is important to mention up front is that I've personally used many of these small form factor profile rigs, and all of them have performed well, and they are all very similar regardless of manufacturer. In fact, for the most part, the frames themselves are nearly identical, so it's very difficult to say that any one is better than the rest. Where things do differ from manufacturer to manufacturer, though, is how they design and implement the mounting points like the wheel deck, the pedal tray, and the seat design and quality. These are the things that should be your deciding factors on which brand you're going to buy, so these are the things that we'll be concentrating on here in this review. Now, you can't review any product without discussing the price, so let's run through that quick first. Everything I mentioned here will be in US dollars, so you'll want to convert it to your local currency if needed. And to keep it simple, I'm going to round prices here to the nearest dollar. For just the Prime Lite frame, you're looking at $550. But if you order it bundled with the RS12 seat you see here, it will cost you $920. Now look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like these prices are cheap. Even these Lite versions are very expensive, especially if you add in a seat. But I'm also not going to say that they aren't worth the money, because they certainly are. Going from a more traditional tubular style rig, or even more so from a wheel stand or a desk setup, to a profile cockpit like this is going to dramatically increase your sim racing experience. So while it is expensive, in my opinion, it's still worth the investment. And if you want to save a little money, just purchase the frame and source a cheap seat out of your local junkyard. Now, real quick, while we're still on the topic of price, I want to mention a few things specifically about the Prime Lite that I believe are pretty decent arguments for why you may want to choose it over its competitors. First, the Prime Lite comes standard with an extended shifter arm that doubles as a rear support mount. In my opinion, this additional support bracket is necessary to achieve the full benefits of a profile rig. This is typically an optional accessory that you have to pay extra for, but it's included here with the Prime Lite at its base price. Second, if you do purchase a seat from GT Omega, it will come standard with a seat slider. Again, here, other manufacturers offer this as an optional accessory that must be paid for. Personally, I think it's crazy to charge extra for items like this when the rig is already very expensive, but some do charge and GT Omega does not. So keep that in mind while you're shopping around for your next rig. The Prime Lite uses 4080 series profile for its primary frame construction. 4080 stands for 40mm by 80mm, and it's on the smaller end of aluminum extrusion. But by using this smaller size, it helps to keep the cost down. And even though it's smaller than some of its larger counterparts, it's still extremely strong. Even these light profile rigs are exponentially stronger than any tubular style rig on the market. Honestly, at this point, if you're in the market for a sim rig at all, my recommendation is always going to point to a profile rig. Yes, they are more expensive, but they are far superior to traditional rigs when it comes to overall rigidness and stability. There's really only a few exceptions where you might want to consider stepping up to a more robust profile rig. One is if you are planning on using an extremely strong direct drive wheelbase, so something along the lines of 18 Newton meters or more. And the second is if you plan on running motion. Now, it's not to say you can't use these smaller rigs in those scenarios, because you absolutely can, but the larger profile rigs are going to do a better job handling those tasks. One of the reasons that I prefer the smaller profile rigs myself, like this Prime Lite, is because of its small and compact size. You still get an extremely stable rig, but it takes up much less space, so it's ideal for people who have smaller spaces like I do here. What you end up with is nearly the same amount of strength and stability as the bigger rigs, but it comes in at a much smaller footprint. And for me, that's a win. I'll put the exact dimensions of the Prime Lite on screen now so you can see the specific details. Another benefit of the Prime Lite, or any profile style cockpit in general, is the fact that aluminum extrusion is very modular. What that means is you can easily add and adjust any additional components you want over time. For example, I've added a few extra brackets and an additional piece of profile to make room for my oddly shaped Hori manual shifter. But a profile rig will grow with you as your sim racing needs change over time, and that's not something that typically can be said for traditional style rigs. Now I'll take a few minutes to discuss arguably the most important pieces of a sim rig. That's the wheel deck and the pedal tray. It doesn't matter how good the frame is, if the wheel deck and the pedal tray are subpar, it makes the entire experience bad. I'll admit in my first look I had some reservations about the design of both on the Prime Lite, but I'm happy to report after several months of hard use with multiple different racing setups, those reservations have become non-issues. The wheel deck has proven to be very solid and easily adjustable for any wheelbase you want to install. It's pre-drilled for most mainstream gear, and I've personally mounted Fanatic, Moza, Camus, and Thrustmaster bases to it without needing to drill any additional mounting holes. The one thing you should be aware of though is because of its design where the wheel deck actually sits on top of a solid piece of profile that acts as a crossbar, there is less knee room underneath than some of its competitors. I haven't personally found this to be an issue, but it could be for some users depending on the placement and how low you like your wheelbase to be. The pedal tray I thought for sure would have a ton of flex due to its thin design, but I actually haven't noticed any while driving. Of course, if I purposely stand on the load cell brake with all of my weight, yes, you can see it dip ever so slightly, but that's not what I would consider a normal racing scenario. While I'm racing, there is no perceivable flex, and that includes even when I'm using my extremely stiff VNM 200 kilogram load cell brake. For most any set of pedals on the market, this is going to stand up to the challenge. As far as compatibility for the pedal tray here, GTO Mega has gone for more of a one-size-fits-all approach. Instead of pre-drilled holes specific to industry standard spacing, they've cut out a series of long channels. Each channel has various spacing and various widths, which I find a bit odd. While I haven't run into any pedal sets that didn't work, it did require me in a few cases to have them off-center from where I would prefer them to be. It's not a huge deal, but it is something to note. Now I'm going to talk about the RS12 seat. I'm honestly not that impressed with this seat. It doesn't seem like it's as good quality as the GTO Mega seats that I've had in the past, so something is definitely off with this one. I also mentioned this in the first look video, and GTO Mega did reach out to me, and they told me that the issues that this one has wouldn't normally make it through quality control, and to be fair, every other seat I've had from them has been top notch. But I can only give my perspective on a product based on the one I received, and the one I received unfortunately has some issues. I do want to make it clear that these are not comfort issues. They are only visual issues, and honestly they do not reflect the experience I've had with GTO Mega seats in the past. In-house I've had RS6, RS9, and XLRS seats, and all of those were great quality with no issues. Unfortunately, this specific RS12 seat has issues with stitching, the logos aren't centered, and they are clearly very crooked. It also has what I would consider an unacceptable level of movement in the seat angle hinges. Most non-fixed back seats will have some of this movement, but in my opinion, this is too much. Now, on a positive note, it is a very comfortable seat. It's more in line with the XLRS seat than it is with the RS6 or the RS9, so it's going to be more comfortable for larger drivers, where the more sporty RS6 and RS9 seats are better suited for smaller body types. I'm 6 foot tall, 190 pounds, and I've had no issues with comfort when sitting in this seat for hours at a time. If GTO Mega decides to send me another seat with better quality control, I'll be glad to revisit the situation, but this is the story with the seat that I currently have in studio. Okay, so now I'm going to start to button up this review. First, I'll go over some pros and some cons, and then I'll finish it up with my final thoughts. So let's start off with the pros. It's very strong and rigid enough for professional grade and very strong direct drive wheels and pedal sets. It's highly adjustable and modular, meaning it can be reconfigured and updated as your sim racing needs change over time. The wheel deck and pedal tray are compatible and pre-drilled for most common sim racing equipment. It comes with an extended shifter arm / rear support mount at its base price where others don't. If you purchase it with a seat, it will come with a seat mount and a seat slider at no additional cost. Despite being very heavy and robust, it has a small footprint. The RS12 seat is very comfortable for long racing sessions. The rig has many optional accessories that can be added, such as direct drive front and side mounts, keyboard trays, caster wheels, and many other items. It should last forever and probably will outlive any other sim racing items you ever purchase. Now let's move over to the cons. First con here is it's very expensive. Even if you purchase it without a seat at $550, that is a huge investment. The seat that I received does not live up to the quality standards I've previously experienced and have come to expect of GTO Mega products. Building a profile rig can be a difficult task, especially if you've never built one before. It's very heavy and awkward to move around. I recommend getting casters if there is any chance you may have to move the rig around your space. GTO Mega often has issues with stock, so it may not be available when you are ready to purchase. And the last con, while it's not a huge deal, the plastic decorative covers pop out and don't stay in place, especially the ones that go on the corner brackets. Every few days, I find one on the floor under the rig. To be fair though, this has pretty much been my experience with every profile rig that I've used that utilizes these same plastic caps. I know that people want me to tell them whether or not this Prime Lite is better than its competitors, and I genuinely wish that I could do that. But the truth is they are all so similar, it's basically impossible to say that one is better than the rest. The issue is this: since all profile cockpits perform so well as sim rigs, it's very hard to find places that any of them underperform. And typically if you want to figure out if something performs better than another, one of them has to be worse at something. And honestly, they're all fantastic. From my own personal experience, this GTO Mega Prime Lite, the Track Racer TR80 Lite, and the SimLab GT1 Evo are all almost identical in the way that they're built, and even more so in the way that they perform. So my recommendation would be this: when you're ready to pull the trigger on a profile rig, buy the one that is in stock and is the cheapest at that time. You're going to get a great product regardless of which one you buy. As for whether or not you should buy a seat, well, that's a tough one. I certainly wouldn't recommend you buy this specific seat that I received this time. But would I recommend the RS12 if it didn't have these issues? Probably, but only if you were the right body type. Again, the RS12 is certainly better suited for larger people. If you're on the smaller side, the RS6 or RS9 is probably going to fit you better. I still maintain that the RS6 seat was one of the most comfortable sim racing seats I've ever had. I just wish the material was more breathable. That's the only complaint I really had with it. In all honesty though, the safest bet is to just buy the rig and then source the seat somewhere else. Preferably from somewhere that you can test out the seat before you buy it. No seat is one size fits all, and if you're going to spend hours upon hours in it, you want to make sure it's going to be comfortable specifically for you before you buy it. And that's pretty hard to do over the internet. So that was my review of the GTO Mega Prime Lite. Hopefully this was helpful in your search for your next sim racing cockpit. If it was, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. As always guys, thanks so much for checking out my videos, and I hope to see you in the next one. We'll see you later.